the Saloon. Hey, have you subscribed yet? You ought to. And also, while you're at it, don't forget to hit that notification bell. So anytime I put out an episode of Shiloh Saloon Stories, you'll be the first to know. Well, you may be asking yourself, what's up with this joker? How did he even get started in this whole music thing? I'll tell you. Well, just a short little synopsis on me as a young man, speaking the age of 5. That's when I really got into music, I think. And I saw Sha Na Na on TV, and it changed me. Something about that, when I was 5 years old, spoke to me. I can remember my granddad still putting Brill cream in my hair and trying to, because I wanted to, dress up like the Sha Na Na guys. He always tell me, a little dab will do you. So from there, I guess about age 9, Purple Rain came out. And I caught the Prince bug like you would not believe. I mean, if it was Prince, I was there. So much so that I had my mother take me to the Greensboro Coliseum when I was 9 years old to see Prince during the Purple Rain tour. It changed my life. And I knew at that moment that this thing that I'd been hearing called music ever since I was a little kid, and ever since I bit it when I was 5 years old with Sha Na Na, I figured out that that's what I wanted to do with my life. And don't ask me how, don't ask me why, but right then at 9 years old in that Greensboro Coliseum, I knew that I would be an entertainer or a musician or something. But that was what I was going to do. That was what my life was going to lead up to be. And here you had it. Years later, I am a professional musician and have been for the last, over 20 years. Well, you fast forward a little bit, and me and my mother go to like I guess it was like a garage. It was a flea market. Went to a flea market, and I wanted an electric guitar. At this time, I was probably 12 years old, 11, 12. Old enough to go to downtown Statesville and drive the two proprietors of the 2 guitar stores that existed downtown. Old enough to go in there and drive them nuts about, 3 or 4 times a week. And then I even made time to go around the corner to the pawn shop in downtown Statesville and managed to drive them pretty crazy too. How did I drive them crazy? By asking to play guitars, messing with the whammy bars, and not knowing how to do a damn thing else than that. So, and I can remember in the pawn shop, notably, everything I do pretty much right-handed, except I write and draw with my left hand. Don't ask me why, but one of the first times I picked up the guitar, I guess in these stores, when I would play them or try to attempt to play them, I would turn them around and try to play them left-handed for some reason. Until one of the guys at the pawn shop said, "Hey," he said, "are you left-handed?" I told him the bit. He said, "Listen, play with your right hand, play right-handed, and it'll help you a lot, especially if you're left-handed anyway and you write left-handed. That's your fretting hand. It'll probably help you a lot." I think he was right. So I decided to play right-handed, and it has saved me a lot of grief. Well, I got into guitar pretty heavy. Got that guitar at the flea market, and the first thing I did was bring it home. It didn't have any strings on it, anything like that. It was a Hondo copy of an SG, a Gibson SG. And I called my grandmother up when I got home, and I told her what had happened, and I said, "It doesn't have strings." And she said, "Well, I'll take you to the music store downtown. I'll come pick you up, and we'll get strings for your guitar." So I'll never forget. I go down to Jason's House of Music. It was in Statesville for, good Lord, my mom remembers the place. So that tells you, it's been around for a minute. It was around when she was a kid, She remembers it when she was a kid. It's no longer there. But, in fact, I played in the building a couple years ago. I think it's a place called the Wine Maestro now in Statesville. I played there a couple years ago. Had no idea that I was playing in Jason's old house, the old Jason's House of Music, same building. My goodness, talk about full circle. But anyway, I went to Jason's and told Jason that I wanted to get guitar strings. Now I'm 12 years old. Well, while he's putting strings on the guitar, at the same time, my uncle, God rest his soul, Cary, he figured out that, I was getting into music, and he made the smart decision to take me aside and say, hey kid, look, if you like this, check this out. And the first thing he laid on me was like Jimi Hendrix, the Rolling Stones, Johnny Winter. Started listening to Johnny Winter stuff. It became apparent to him that I like blues. And I'll never forget going up to his house during the summertime, and he was sitting on the front porch with a buddy of his, and they were both drinking Miller High Life 40 ounces and listening to the best of Muddy Waters. And when I heard that stand-up bass and electric guitar, Muddy Waters and Big Ed Crawford together, I mean, it just blew my mind. I think it was Can't Be Satisfied, because to this day that song still resonates with me a lot, and I think that's why. But anyway, my uncle took note of that and started turning me on to all this blues music. And I mean, back then, we're talking about the late 80s. I mean, night music came on with David Sanborn, who would have a lot of blues people. Blues was like exploding back then because of Stevie Ray Vaughan. I mean, it did a lot for blues music. So, that stuff was on TV, and it was very accessible in a time when you didn't have YouTube or anything like that. Me and my uncle would be sitting around and say, hey, come here, Albert King's on TV, check this out. Or, tell me about Lightnin Hopkins. And around that time, too, I started figuring out that at the public library in town, I could check out records by Lightnin Hopkins, by Robert Nighthawk, Booker White, all these people, Son House, all these great records, bluegrass records, country records. I mean, you name it, they had it. So I had gotten bitten by the blues bug really, really bad. That was my thing. Lightnin Hopkins, Muddy Waters, Robert Johnson. If you didn't know who Robert Johnson was when I was 12 years old, then I wouldn't even talk to you. But anyway, so I go to Jason's house and use it to get strings on the guitar. And I go in there while he's putting the strings on, and I'm down there yapping, about Robert Johnson. I think I'd just gotten the Robert Johnson, a cassette, of his music. And I'm down there yapping to Jason about it, who probably has no idea what the hell I'm even talking about. All of a sudden I hear from upstairs this coming down the stairs real quick. And it's none other than this guy that's, probably in his late 40s, kind of unkempt hair, wild looking, He's like, hey, who's out here talking about Robert Johnson? Well, it turns out it's Max Drake. And Max Drake was also from Statesville, North Carolina, a well-known guitar player who had played for years with a band called Arhoolie. Really well known all up and down the Southeast. And he's still around. He's one of the most blistering guitar players you'll ever hear. He's a guitar player's guitar player. And so he turned around and saw little 12-year-old me talking about Robert Johnson. Well, this was pretty crazy for, 1988. This was before, kids were on YouTube and becoming bluesmen at age 9, and doing all that stuff. So this was pretty wild back then, So me and Max got to talking, and he goes, I teach guitar. I teach guitar upstairs. He says, but you come by my house and pay me $25, and I'll give you a guitar lesson. So I go by his house. About the next week, I got my guitar. Oh man, I'm gonna learn, because I can't read tablature to this day. I really can't. I tried, it just didn't work for me. I don't even know how to make a chord on this guitar, but I have spent, we'll go into that later. I don't know a chord. I don't know anything in this guitar. I've just been banging on it, all week. Don't even know what I'm doing with it. I take it over to Max's. He takes me back to this room, and he's got this big super reverb amp sitting up on a stool in the back, and he's got an acoustic guitar with a Diamond pickup in it, like Lightnin Hopkins. And he shows me the EAB thing. Max Drake, to this day, if you ever meet him and ask about me to him, ask him about me, first thing out of his mouth he'll say probably is, I taught him his first E chord, which is true. So I left that lesson very disillusioned. and did not have another one because I realized that, man, this shit's kind of hard. So I played guitar for about 2 years, never learned a chord, just played with the radio. I mean, I would take my favorite albums and stuff, and I found like this one, I could find what key they were in and do my one little couple licks, one or two little things I knew how to do. I did that for years. I never even learned a chord. And by the time I was 16, I was getting into things besides guitars, and experimenting, as they say. Which, I did that and fucked around like that till I was about 19 years old. I went to college. I put the guitar down. I just stopped playing it. Went to art school for about 6 months and figured out I wasn't an artist. See, back when I was a kid, it was still a deal where if you didn't go to college, nothing was going to happen with your life. So I thought, what am I going to do? And the only thing I knew to do was draw. I'd been drawing since I was a kid, and everybody's like, he's an artist. The kid's a goddamn artist, I wasn't an artist, and I found that out real quick in art school. So I came back home after 6 months, and about a year into me coming back to Statesville, my Uncle Cary, who turned me on to all this great music, passed away unexpectedly. It broke my damn heart. We were so close. He taught me so much about life, about music in general. We were just, he was the person in my mom's side of the family that I could really relate to, as far as, on things like music and movies and things like that. He had, hitchhiked all over America. He'd gone to every state in America pretty much. I mean, he hitchhiked to Woodstock. I mean, he was like an old biker guy, he was fantastic. He turned me on to Easy Rider magazines, and he left a huge hole in my heart. So I'll never forget, he had this Fleetwood Mac tape, and I don't mean with Lindsey Buckingham and the Chicks. I'm talking about Peter Green, the original Fleetwood Mac. And, that was one of the first things that I ever heard. And Spooky Tooth was on the other side of it, which took me years to learn that's who it was. But, that music, when I heard the first old Fleetwood Mac, man, it blew me away. It just had a feeling, or just it painted something for me. I can't, to this day, put my fingers on, but I think really what it is it just reminded me of my uncle. So when he passed, he had this tape of Fleetwood Mac and Spooky Tooth on the other side of it. And it's just a little black cassette tape. And I remember I used to steal it from him all the time, and he'd come back over to my house and steal it back, get it back, not steal it back, but get it back. And sometimes he'd take one of my tapes, or whatever. But anyway, I just remember when he passed, I just started really listening to that old Fleetwood Mac stuff. And it made me take my guitar out again and start playing. And so one day I call up Max Drake. I still had his phone number. I hadn't talked to him in years. Now, mind you, when I was like, 13, 14, Max was like the first person I ever saw that was a real guitar player. I mean, I'm talking a real guitar player that could really play the shit out of the thing. And the only time I ever saw that was through Max, by going to little clubs when he'd play in Statesville and stuff. He'd get me in and say, "Oh, it's my nephew, I got to watch him for the weekend," kind of thing, So I'd get to hang out and watch Max play. So I still had his phone number. And I decided that I would call him up. At the time, I had just gotten a job at this place called T-Town Video. It was a video store out in the middle of the country. And usually it didn't have, in a work day, you probably didn't get 8-hour work day. Since it was so far out, you probably checked out maybe 7 customers, But anyway, I'm out there at T-Town Video one day. I started taking my guitar out there to try to figure out how to play. I was learning how to play chords and whatnot. Really, really spending that whole 8 hours because I figured out that people weren't coming out there, and I was just sitting around. I might as well bring my guitar. And so that's what I would do. I would sit out there for 8 hours a day and do nothing but play guitar. And when, it started to be if somebody came in the store or whatnot, I'd just keep playing, because that way I would kind of gauge my progress by if they, made a comment about it or whatnot. So I call Max up and I go, "Hey, Max, this is Matt." Silence. Matt who? Matt Walsh. Well, goddamn, why didn't you just say so? So anyway, I told him what I'd been up to, and he said, yeah, I've seen you around town. You don't look like you're doing too good. Stuff like that. If you know Max Drake, he's a crotchety old guy way before his time, even before he got old. But anyway, this thing started where he started coming over to my house. And it really wasn't like a formal lesson, but he would come over to my house and we'd just kind of hang out and talk, and he'd show me things, and he showed me enough that I could go off on my own and figure things out, especially at blues things. He showed me enough about finger picking and techniques, in a short amount of time, that I was able to go off on my own. And he and my mom had gone to high school together. So a lot of the time it would be him coming over to the house and then, spending time showing me stuff on the guitar. And then the other half would just be like him and my mom telling me what an idiot I was for trying to, having this harebrained idea to become a professional musician or go out and do, try to do this, which I wasn't, I mean, we're kind of jumping around here, I do get into that. So I guess we should go to that next, because that's when those talks started happening, Max would go, you want to be a fucking musician? Are you kidding me? I was just in Chicago last week in a goddamn stadium in a fucking locker room that was 99 goddamn degrees, sweating through a fucking dress shirt. Are you fucking kidding? So that was basically, and Max was, he was tough on me. I mean, these young cats today, they got it easy with YouTube, because YouTube really doesn't yell back or browbeat you or anything like that. But Max, thank God that he was like that, because it taught me not to take myself seriously and to do, try to do better, because, he would just, if he was out playing for a while, I think, he, out of town or something, he wasn't accessible. He'd come back and I'd show him some shit I'd done, and he'd be like, oh yeah, I can tell, you've been away from me for a while. Shit like that. And he'd just tell me, shit sucked, he would just brutal. Hey man, it'd sound a lot better if you play it fucking not so goddamn fast. So anyway, around this time, I'm learning all these rudiments of blues guitar and whatnot, and getting chastised by Max. And God bless him. This friend of mine comes out to the video store. Friend of mine, he's still a great friend of mine, known him all my life, Ian Hines. And he comes out and, he's starting to notice how good I'm getting at the guitar, And he says, look, I got a friend of mine that I grew up with that plays. And he plays blues like you do, like old school blues. His name's Abe Reid. I'd never heard of Abe Reid in my life. He says, so, you ought to check him out, and I can hook you two up, and y'all just, and I figured he just meant like the jam, I had no aspirations of going out and playing music in front of someone. My music just went, it didn't go any farther than the front porch of my house, where I was living with my mother. And so I said, yeah, that'd be cool, man. I'd love to jam with somebody. I also jammed with my buddy Tim Tobey, who was a harmonica player, just a novice harmonica player. And he worked at Crescent Electric and would come and pick me up. He worked second shift, so he'd come pick me up about midnight. And then we'd go over to his house and jam till about 3 a.m. and record it and do all kinds of crazy recordings and characters and whatnot. Not far from what I do today with all my characters and stuff. But he sets. I call Abe, tell him the deal. Ian's already called him and kind of prepped him for my phone call. And he says, yeah, man. He says, meet me down here at the Dollar General from your house. I'll come pick you up, tomorrow. Well, I went down there with my little guitar, sat there for, about 30 minutes. He never came. So I go back home. Well, the next day he calls me. hey man, sorry that couldn't make it. Something came up, blah blah blah. But hey, we're down here, me and my wife, we're down here painting a house downtown. Won't you get a ride down here or come down here and bring your guitar, man? We'll jam. Sounds pretty good. So I'd take my guitar and put it on my back and walk downtown. It's about, 2 or 3 miles, walk down there. And go to this house, and there's Abe. He's painting this house. Go inside the house, and I'm sitting around kind of going, well, damn, I thought like maybe he was on break or something, and we would play guitar. I just didn't know what to expect. And he says, hey, man, let me hear what you're doing. He's up on a ladder painting. And I take my guitar out and start playing some blues stuff. And I remember he comes down off the ladder, and he's just knocked out. Whoa, man, he's like, where are you playing? And I was like, hey, my front porch. And apparently he had just won like this blues competition in Memphis or whatever, or something like that. And, had been given like a tour. They booked him like a tour and gave him recording time, all this stuff. So anyway, I said, hey man, I just play for fun, He said, oh man, you should be out gigging. You should be out gigging, And I'm like, I never even imagined that I could do that, And so he gets off the ladder, finishes up his job, and we go out back of the house, and he picks up the guitar and starts showing me some stuff. He's playing some, I think it was like Shake Your Money Maker or something like that, Elmer James, and we're passing the guitar back and forth, just kind of, really getting off on that we're into this same kind of music, and that we can play it, because we're talking about Statesville back in this would have been 98, 97. There wasn't a downtown scene or anything like that, and much less no one played blues around there like this that I knew of. So the next thing that comes out of his mouth is he goes, hey, I'm playing on WQFS in Greensboro, college, Guilford College, next week. He said, why don't you come up there and play on the radio with me? This show called Scratching the Blues by a guy named Ralph Spees, God rest his soul. He did a lot for the Triad blues scene over the years, documenting it. And so I said, great, And the next week I find myself in Abe's little car, riding down the road with him, looking at a map, trying to figure out where the hell we are, We did not have MapQuest or, any kind of map directions or GPS or anything like that. MapQuest is years away. So, I go on this radio station, and my first, gig is at WQFS, and playing with Abe Reid. And from there, he started playing Monday nights at this place called the Record and Landmark Bar, downtown Statesville. It was a huge bar. It wasn't the Record Landmarks, excuse me. Mine, too many beers. That's the newspaper in Statesville. It was called the Landmark, I think is what it was called, Downtown Landmark Bar. But anyway, it was a huge bar. And Abe started hosting an open jam down there, and he basically had like a little band that played with him, and that was me and a couple other musicians. So I started going down there every Monday night and playing in front of people. This is my first exposure to playing live music in front of people. And before I know it, we're going and playing in Charlotte for people. We're going and playing in Winston for folks. And then the next thing I know, from Abe winning this competition, they booked him a tour. So like my first, 6 months to a year into this thing, I find myself in Helena, Arkansas at the King Biscuit Blues Festival, where I end up, playing on the street, playing on the stage with Abe, the whole thing. It was just wild. One minute I didn't really even know what the King Biscuit Blues Festival was, but the next thing I know, I'm playing at it. Remember, I'll never forget. We drove like throughout the night, and in the morning, one of the most miserable I've ever been is in the middle of a field in Mississippi. In the morning with the windows down because it was so hot, getting eaten by gnats, trying to sleep for just a little bit for like an hour so we could make it to the hotel. So, basically, from there we would play in Florida at the Spring in the Blues Festival, I'm going all around, going to Nashville, there's a stop there. I ended up playing at this Back Alley Blues Bar, I think is what it was called. I think it's still there to this day. But I went from playing in my living room to just thrust into this thing. You know, it's not like I even wanted to, you know, like, or like, I mean, it's not, let me rephrase that. It wasn't something I sought out. It just found me, you know what I mean? I had come a long way, I think, from the time I was 9 years old. I had gone through a lot of changes when I thought to myself, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to be a musician. But somehow that intuition or that foresight caught up with me, because that's exactly what happened, you know. And I started realizing that dream again. But it's a weird thing, because it wasn't something I actively sought out. And I don't know that I would have ever done it had my friend Ann Hines not said, hey, there's a guy in town that's into the same stuff that you are. And if I hadn't met Abe, really, because, you know, he was the one that got me out gigging and said, hey, man, you need to play in front of an audience. You're that good, you know. So for a couple years, you know, I guess it was about a year and a half, 2 years, I played with Abe. We'll go on the road, go all around North Carolina with him and beyond, other states. And through watching him, I started figuring out like how to book a gig, you know, how this works, what to ask for, how much money. I started figuring out how much I was getting paid. If I got paid, sometimes I did, sometimes, you know, that's a whole nother story. I'm not even going to go there. But I started figuring out how you did it, you know, back then you had a promo pack, you know, you go, you know, take some photos and do a little typewriting, you know, or whatever, and then go to Kinko's or Copy Place and copy it off, and, you know, you make this little, you know, 4 or 5 page booklet, little promo pack, and that's how you take it to clubs and give it to them. That's how you get gigs. Well, you know, I just basically started booking stuff on my own, because I realized that, hey, you know, on top of my little video store paycheck that comes in, hell, man, back then, starting out, you know, I was going and booking gigs, solo gigs, like, you know, that weren't far from me, because I didn't have a car. So I'd have to either like get someone to drop me off there or find a buddy I could play with who drove, which I did a lot of times. That's pretty much what I did a lot of times. But I figured out that if I could line up a little gig for $200, that, hey, man, you know, at 19 years old, 20 years old, you know, my little video store paycheck and doing a couple gigs a week for $100 plus the tips we'd make, that, you know, this ain't too bad right here, this whole music thing. So, you know, as time went on, I felt like, you know, I felt like I couldn't really grow into this musician that I was aspiring to be in my own hometown. Because, I mean, you got, you know, the first couple gigs I did on my own in my hometown, you know, people were screaming at me like, shut up, you know, you can't sing worth shit. I mean, really, literally. Things used to be like that. And you know, a lot of it was just because people weren't used to me, people I'd gone to high school with, whatnot. So, you know, the next thing I know, this little girl comes out of the video store. She's 18. I think I was about 20 or 21, something like that. And we start hanging out and whatnot. Well, you know, she becomes my girlfriend and all that kind of stuff and everything. And I'm still playing music and whatnots and hanging out with her. Till she says, hey, I'm going to move back to where I came from, which is Nebraska. And, you know, she asked me, did I want to go with her? And it just happened at the right time that, you know, I didn't have a car. And I'll tell you right now, at 20 years old or 21, whatever, I didn't even have a license. I'd never got a license until I was, I think, 22, something like that. And the reason being is because, you know, all my friends had cars, and you know, I knew I drank a lot, you know, my early days when I would be out gigging and stuff. So, you know, I didn't want to get a DUI. So I also never had a reason to get a license, really. I was into other things, you know, like guitar playing. As crazy as that sounds. But I wanted to get out of Statesville. I knew that I could not broaden myself as a musician or find out who I was by just hanging around in town. So when she said, I'm going to move to Nebraska, do you want to go with me? I said, yes. Because that way, I thought to myself, if I go to Nebraska or wherever we end up at the end of this, wherever we go, they're not going to know who I am. They're not going to remember me from high school. They're not going to remember me from the video store. They're not going to, you know what I'm saying? I could reinvent myself and be whatever I wanted to be. And not only that, I could take all these things that I'd learned and present them to this, you know, this blank slate of an audience, pretty much. So that's what I did. I ended up taking 2 guitars, my little Hohner resonator guitar, Dobro, and my Yamaha acoustic guitar, which I still play to this day. It's a late 70s Yamaha that somebody came out to the video store one day and said, hey, I was playing a little Stella guitar from the 60s. And somebody said, hey man, I got a great guitar, man. It's a Yamaha. I don't play it anymore. I'll sell it to you for $100 if you like it. You know, he brought it out. I bought it. So, anyway, I end up getting on a Greyhound bus and going with this girl to Nebraska, to Bellevue, Nebraska, where I stay for a good 2 months, which was, I would sum it up as a frozen wasteland that had no opportunities for me as a musician. That's part 1 of this story. Part 2 comes tomorrow. When I leave, not tomorrow, did I say that? Maybe it will be tomorrow. It'll be definitely on the next episode of Shiloh Saloon Stories. We'll pick up part 2. I left Bellevue, Nebraska as a budding musician and moved to Wichita, Kansas. Folks, if you like these Shiloh Saloon stories, I encourage you to subscribe, and not only that, get notifications so when I release another one, YouTube will let you know. Also have the Friday Night Gamble, the variety show that I host that features North Carolina musicians, comedy, craziness, wild characters, all that. And my other show, Out of Control Vintage, which highlights vintage guitars and amplifiers. And some of them are ones that I own. Some of them are, you know, friends' guitars that we go and visit them. Some of them are vintage guitar stores we drop in on. But you got to get those notifications. You got to subscribe if you like this stuff. And you got to come back to the saloon to find out what happens to my crazy ass once I go from Bellevue, Nebraska to Wichita, Kansas. One drink of beer left. Y'all come back now, you hear? Wichita, Kansas. What was I thinking?